Kia ora, Chris Parkin here, and this is a video done for Senior Net, predominantly for lower huts, and this is going to be a little bit about a particular part of Lightroom that is just an awful lot easier to show people on video than it is to try and do on presentation. So, and do this all going well, you'll see it on the day, but if not, it'll be uploaded probably to YouTube. Okay, so this is our selective adjustment areas. You've got a number of tools that you can actually access to get it basically the same set of adjustments. You've got this option here, which basically acts as a graduated filter. So if I pull the exposure back, I'm going to do it ridiculously so you can see clearly. You can actually change the tilt, but you can also change the way that feathering happens, and you can make some really weird effects with it. That's not necessarily a good one, but it's often used as a mask, the same way as you would a filter on the end of your camera, and it can be quite useful for darkening down skies. So that's one option. We can grab this and move the whole point around, so if you've tipped the whole thing sideways, that can give you some quite good control, just say you haven't taken your image in portrait. You can also hit this select show mask overlay, and that actually shows you the area that mask is working on, which is really useful if you're doing something comparatively subtle and you're going, am I actually working on that area? When you click that, you can see what you're actually doing. You can also change these pins so that they show up or they don't, and that becomes more useful when we get to this tool, which is the adjustment brush or selective adjustment brush. But just before we do, I'll show you the radial filter, which acts as a circle. Same idea as the other tool. In this case, it's on the outside, but you can invert it, so you can make it to darken the center down. I'm not quite sure why you might like to. Well, actually, you might like to do that if you're wanting to lighten up the center, or to increase the clarity, which actually has that kind of nice effect of pulling your eye into the center. I'm looking at this and going, actually the highlights are a little bit too bright at that point, so we might as well move down to the highlights, and that's actually quite a nice tool. Pulling back those highlights, as long as you've got the detail in your original shot, you can see what happens in the histogram up here as I move that. It's basically pulling it back into the center, and that allows our eye to focus on something and make sure that there's actually detail there, as long as there's detail there at the very beginning. So what are the other functions that we've got in here? We have exposure, which we've already done, which is your simply your brightness. Then you have contrast, so you're making it increasing or decreasing the contrast. Depends on the image. When you increase the contrast, it can actually make things too dark, and you may find that you need to lighten things up, or it might do the reverse. Depends on where the what's actually in the image and what you're trying to achieve. The highlights we've already done. The shadows is a really useful tool, especially if you've taken an image at night and you've got a lot of shadows in there and you want to try and actually see into the shadows. You can open those up. Be aware that if you have got that situation and you've ended up using a fairly high ISO, one of the things that can happen is as you bring those shadows up, you can find that the noise that's hidden in those shadows can become quite apparent. So we'll have talked about ISO and noise earlier, so yeah, just a warning to for that trap. Whites, that's shifting basically the whole of the histogram across here, not just the highlight section, which is kind of this bit, and you can see the effect of it. And the interesting thing is it does actually decrease the contrast if you do move those whites. So personally, I tend not to change those too much. I'm just going to hit 0 on these. And then blacks, that can be quite an effective tool for just giving the image a little bit more punch, but at the same time you can overdo it. Now we will have talked about the histogram before, and these edges the nice thing about the histogram in Lightroom is you can actually click on this and it will show shadow clipping. So any of those areas that are blue, there is no more detail in them, they are pure black at that point. And the same thing with the whites. So if we have the highlight clipping on there, you can see these patches here are pure white. There's just no detail left in them, which is, again, generally not a great option. We will reset those. Texture is basically bringing out a form of detail. Not quite the same as clarity, it's using a different set of algorithms. Not entirely sure what exactly they've done differently between the two. I tend to use clarity more than anything else, and that's basically increasing the localized contrast. And it can be quite a useful cheat if you've managed to stuff up your focus very slightly. And you can go in and increase the clarity on the piece that you want in focus and decrease the clarity on the piece that you don't. So the way that you would do that is you'd actually get your adjustment brush, paint on the area that you want, which, say, increase the clarity over there, and then say there's people over here that we don't want our eyes going to, so we can actually go new mask and paint in there, and we don't want the shadows in there. We want to drop the clarity, and in fact I'm going to drop the saturation a little bit as well, which will mean that the shirts and stuff don't show up quite so much. That's not quite enough, so you can actually go in with another brush and drop the saturation in that area again a little bit more, and in fact I can cheat and actually turn that area a little bit green to match the grass, and now they fade out at the distance. They fade out almost entirely, and if I hit reset, you can see they pop back up a little bit more. So that reset button is really useful, just like would, etc. Control Z will undo, so you can get back to where you were at least one step back, and that can be quite a useful function. Dehaze basically reduces the or increases the contrast when there's blues involved, which is basically when you tend to get haze in a picture. It's a little bit like clarity. It can be overdone, just like clarity can, but that's quite a useful tool as well. Vibrance, that's a little bit like a black and white one, but it's not quite as brutal as the saturation adjustment. So the saturation can make things really, really punchy, or can reduce things to black and white. That said, with the black and white, there is a much better way of doing black and white, and that is the hue saturation color option, and there is a black and white function in this, which we click on black and white and then go back down to that hue saturation function, and we can actually turn things that are green darker, and we can turn blues, say, darker or lighter depending on which one you want. In this case I think I like the contrast that's added. I do, however, want to be careful that there is a bit of a halo around this piece here. So if I go in, hopefully it's fine enough adjustment. Nope, it's not. So I want to zoom in a little bit more. Alright, change that to 2 to 1. There we go. And then the ACK was really not showing up. Bother. Okay. So you can get in there and change it if there's enough of a difference. So if we hit reset, there we go, you can see there's a purple there and a green there. Now that is coming from what we call chromatic aberration on the lens, and so we go into the lens correction and we can click on that defringe, and that means that when we go back in and turn it into black and white, that should get rid of that side of things. So there's a huge amount of functionality in here. It takes a while to just get used to and play around with, but it's an awful lot of fun. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding as to some of the functionality, and we'll keep going with some of the others in the presentation if we haven't run out of time.